Um, I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the logistics while Anne and Faivon are working through sound with Mara. Whoops, and I'm muted. No, now I'm unmuted. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody. We'll get going with the actual program in a few minutes once we get some better sound from VTDigger. And we're going to go today. It runs a bit over an hour. And Anne's going to start out by just telling us kind of where VTDigger is in the here and now and what's going on with everything there. And I have a few questions that we have here at INN or that we've heard from other members. And so we'll start out there with 3 or 4 questions and a conversation with Anne. It's kind of like a fireside chat format, except with 3,000 miles separating us. And then we'll open it up to Q&A from all of you. As I put, if all of you are on Zoom, if you have the chat function open, it's great if you can put questions in chat, because then everyone can see them as you post them. And we have a lot of people on this call, so it's easier to pull questions off chat and direct those to Anne. But if you want to jump in and join a conversation and ask a question or comment on something, just be sure to unmute. You should see a little microphone symbol. And Mara Jazor and I will moderate throughout the call from INN, but jump in if you have a question. Go ahead, Mara.
I was just going to say, I think I just unmuted Anne and Faivon. It's the 802 number, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you so much better now. Thank you so much.
Great.
Good.
So the other thing I will just mention and then turn over to Anne is I think most people who are on this call have probably read the VTDigger case study, which was done by Tim Griggs. Unfortunately, Tim couldn't join this call today because of a workshop he's leading, so he isn't here. But I encourage everyone, if you haven't read the case study, it's terrific. Tim did a great job, and Anne and the entire VTDigger staff just were so forthcoming and open in sharing what's happened there that it's a good read as well as a worthwhile read. So I wanted to encourage anyone who hasn't read it already to dip into that. We will refer to it. We're not going to pull up screenshots of it during this. So I will refer to some charts and some data in there, and you can find it online. So with that, Anne, I'm going to, let's see, we're going to try to unmute you again. And I wanted to ask you if you and Faivon can kind of introduce yourselves in terms of what you focus on. And Anne, you're the founder of the organization, but you do editorial and you do some business. So tell us a little bit about everything you're doing, and Faivon, and just where VTDigger is now, how big you are, your challenges for the coming year, you know, kind of set the scene for us as we start the conversation.
Sure. Well, I'm the founder and executive director, Anne Galloway, and Faivon is our director of business development. She has the membership campaign, and she's involved in coming up with products that money in future. Can you all hear us okay?
Yes, and I'm muting your video just so you know, so that there's not an echo. So the audio will come from your phone.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Yeah.
So this year we're concentrating on raising about $500,000 to $550,000 in membership and donations from readers, and we're looking to raise $650,000 in business underwriting. And in addition to those 2 base funding projects, we have an AP-style distribution service, and we sell content to 15 news outlets, and we make about $60,000 to $70,000 a year on that project, and that's also a kind of grassroots marketing product for us. We are looking to also increase our large donations for a special project we're involved in called the Growth Fund. And that's work we haven't really done before. We're meeting with large donors and helping them understand what we're doing and where we're headed. Our goal ultimately is to double our readership, double our impact, and double our sustainable revenue over the next 3 or 4 years. And our goal is to get to 1.2 million. We're now at 1.2 million for our base budget. We have about $300,000 in growth fund initiative money that we're using this year to basically accelerate product development and initiatives like boosting our underwriting. And our goal is to get to $2 million a year by the end of this 3 to 4 year period, so that we can sustain a large, robust news operation here in Vermont with an appropriate percentage of personnel here who are managing membership, underwriting, large donor campaigns, and other business activities. So that's kind of a high-level look at what we plan to do this year.
Yep, and in my role, I'm going to help her try to accomplish all that. And so we're going to focus on new business products, evolve the news syndication to include broadcast media, and incorporate e-commerce functioning for user-submitted content for obits, job listings, stuff like that. And then really drill down and make the most of our email list. And that's going to include additional email products, targeted and segmented email products, maybe opt-in, maybe premium for our members. And so that's also what we're going to try to work out this year, hopefully.
Great. So, Anne, as we go into this, I want to step back and when Tim was doing the case study, the thing that jumps out to me the most in the case study is something you just referenced, that you're making sure you have appropriate levels of people on all the business and donation and outreach sides. And the striking thing to me, looking across nonprofits across the country and VTDigger in the early years, is that the minute you got any money, your staffing, your initial staffing was very, very heavy on the business side. My recollection of that chart is that you basically hired 4 people on the business side when you were still the only person on the editorial side full time. And so the interesting thing about that is, while it was so lopsided to begin with, then the business side stayed about the same size or just slowly grew, but the editorial grew and grew and grew, and to where you are today. And cast yourself back to when you made those initial decisions. How did you decide which non-editorial positions to emphasize, and what made you willing to put that much emphasis on the business side that early?
Well, I don't really like accounting. So I like to pass off things I don't like to do. And I also knew that I just wouldn't have the time and the energy and the focus to do a really good job at the membership campaign. And
Hey, Anne, you're breaking up a little bit.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I decided early on to hire a business manager who handled our accounting with a certified public accountant. Basically, I needed someone to enter all of the transactions into QuickBooks. And then I also needed a salesperson, I believe, right away. And I had the business manager help me write grant applications, and I did a fair amount of business activity myself. I met with a lot of people. I learned really early on that it was important to meet with people in the business community to help them understand the vision for Digger and to help them understand what our mission was, and why we needed to exist. And it turned out that as I was trying to say before, and I was breaking up, I don't like to do accounting. I I don't have the focus of all I have to do on the editorial side to bring the focus that's necessary to managing a membership campaign, managing all the transactions that we needed to grow. And so I wanted to give up the things that I knew I wasn't good at and I didn't like, but that I knew were critical to the business. And so that's why I hired a business manager right away. Right away meaning really a year and a half, almost 2 years into running Digger on my own, without any staff. And then I hired an underwriting salesperson kind of as an experiment, because I figured if this person went out and sold underwriting, they could pay for themselves and they could raise a little bit more, which would help us hire a reporter and support the editorial side of the news, of the operation. And so that turned out to be a good move, because we were able to raise more money through donations and through underwriting. And then I was able to hire more reporters. And as I hired more reporters, we had more readers and we had more businesses buy in and we had more members. So it's sort of a spiraling thing where, we're producing content that people want, and they want to give us money. And if we don't have the capacity in the business office to take the money, that's a real problem. And actually right now, we have that problem right now. I mean, even though, we've grown a lot, we absolutely have to hire a second underwriting salesperson, because we have a boots on the ground problem. We're not able to get to enough businesses to grow underwriting. We've been stuck at $400,000 a year now for 4 years. And we have the capacity to sell. We have 1 million page views a month, and 50% of our inventory is available. So we need somebody else. We need more people to sell for us so that we can take advantage of the fact that we have a tremendous number of page views. So we're all, I'm always trying to think about, the business capacity we have and how we're going to grow the business side enough to support growth on the news side. It's an ongoing, it hasn't changed. I'm still struggling with that.
So one of the things you just talked about, so you've been stuck at 400, you need to add a second person. How do you scale up? Do you say, we have one person, we have 400,000, and do you guys put your heads together and say, all right, we need to get a grant or a fundraise or move this much to hire that person, or we're going to go into the red to hire, or we're going to try to hire part-time? How do you handle those scale leaps?
Well, we're lucky, right? The scale leaps in the past have really been leaps. I mean, I just took a risk when I hired the salesperson. I didn't know if he was going to be able to make the money we needed. And I was able to, we were able to raise initially about 160,000, and grew to 250, and then eventually he left. We hired a new person. We got to 400,000 shortly afterward. So I took a risk when I didn't have the money. But when you're paying people incrementally, you have a base salary for sales and then commissions on top of that. It pays for itself pretty quickly. If you're paying a base salary, in our case of, $35,000, and then on top of that, you're giving someone a commission of 14%, you can make up the difference with a couple of really good sales. I mean, we have a package that sells annually for $20,000. All you need is 2 annual packages with Digger to pay the base salary, and everything else is gravy. So you have to really think about it in terms of the return on investment. The investment's quite small, and the returns can be really big. So that's how we did that initially. We have the luxury right now to use some growth fund dollars to pay for that base salary for the second underwriting position. But that's not a long-term solution. This is a temporary infusion of money that's going to go away in a few years. And these people need to be able to support themselves. So it's everything on the business side has to have an ROI. The membership, we're totally focused on, and Pavan can talk about this more, but we didn't have a membership person per se until last year, and Pavan was basically doing everything at Digger, which was untenable. You know, we were able to hire someone who could concentrate on just membership, but we still try to keep that as limited as possible. We have 2 membership campaigns a year. There's one in the spring, there's one at the end of the year, and we're all about the ROI on that. We don't want to, it's a full-time job for basically maybe 8 months of the year. The other 4 months of the year, Florencio, who's running our campaign, is involved in graphic design and the annual report and things like that. So, you know, I don't want, until we grow our membership a bit more, I don't want it to be a sort of complete takeover of that, you know, that role. There are other things that Florencio can do in the meantime, but yeah, that's how we've done it. I mean, you can't make money if you don't spend money. That's the reality. Part of what's really critical to our model, though, is that we're a daily news outlet, and that daily habit through the email, through Facebook, through Twitter is mission critical when it comes to the business side. You know, that's how we've been able to grow our readership. And if you don't have critical mass of your readership, you can't raise as much money. Mm-hmm. So our ability to raise money has increased as we've increased our readership.
Could you talk a little bit about another thing you started early on? And I'm curious if you can tell a little bit how you started it when you were even a solo operator, and then how you address it now, and that's market research. That's something that a lot of nonprofits tell us they need help with or feel like they need to do more with. So I'd love to hear about your early experience and how you handle it now.
Well, when I first started Digger in 2009, I had this idea. I looked at news websites like MinPost and ProPublica, and I looked at Voice of San Diego, all these new, and then the New Haven Independent, all these new online publications, which really intrigued me. And at the time, I thought, you know, I've got to go nonprofit because there is no profit in media, right? I mean, we know that now. Commercial media is really struggling, with the exception of the nationals like the New York Times and the Washington Post. So I created a spreadsheet to compare each of the news websites, and I looked at all kinds of things. I looked at how often they published. I looked at the platforms they used. I looked at how they raised money, and then I took a small business development center course, and I wrote a business plan. And during that course, the instructor kept saying, you know, this is really about filling in market niche. What do people need? That's what you need to be thinking about. Don't be thinking about what you can offer. I mean, it should be a matchup, but figure out first what the need is in your community. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on that because I'd been an editor at the local newspaper, and it seemed really painfully obvious to me that there wasn't enough political coverage, there wasn't enough in-depth reporting on policy issues, there was zero investigative reporting. And I thought, well, that's what I can do, and that seems to be the need, but I had to go out and test that. You know, instead of assuming that was the case, I basically developed a questionnaire, and I went to the University of Vermont, and I asked students questions about, you know, what publications they read, why they read those publications in Vermont, would they read an online publication, you know, would that be something they go back to every day? Did they use email? Were they, at that point, cell phones weren't as predominant as they are now. But, you know, I asked them some basic questions, and then I basically typed that up as part of my Small Business Development Center project. I also, at the time, thought it would be really important to talk to business leaders. So and this was part of my repertorial quest. You know, I decided that I needed to know if people thought this was a stupid idea or not. So I called prominent business people, and I pitched them the concept, and half the people I talked to said, wow, that's a great idea, I'd love to help you, and the other half said, you're nuts, it's a terrible idea. In the end, I every time I'd finish an interview with someone, I'd say, "Is there someone else that you recommend I talk to?" It's just that old reporter's question, right?
Yeah.
You know, who else should? And they would refer me to the next person, and it's interesting because that series of conversations, I ended up over a couple of months talking to about 100 people, and it really became the framework for forming an advisory board, for reaching out for help when I needed to contact someone in the business for underwriting. I began using some of the people I talked to as informal advisors when I needed help with anything, you know, whether it was figuring out who to talk to about live streaming or who to talk to about collaboration with other news outlets. I did talk to a number of publishers at the time too. Because, you know, at Digger, we didn't want to be, we're disruptors, right? Because we have effectively replaced the Burlington Free Press and Times-Argus and Rutland Herald in terms of their state government coverage. In fact, on Adjournment Day, there was no representation from those two newspapers or from the Associated Press, which, you know, for us, Adjournment, the State House is kind of like not covering the Super Bowl, right? And we had, you know, 5 reporters there, 7 days. An alternative magazine had 3, and Vermont Public Radio had 1 person. So it's really interesting. Our landscape has changed a lot, in part in response to us, because we're really aggressive in our reporting. We go toe to toe. We compete with the other news outlets, and then we give content to local weeklies and dailies. But that competition is really important because it shows that we're serious about what we're doing, and readers like that, and it's been part of, you know, how we've gotten where we are. I'm not sure where I was going with that. Oh, market research now. We do. Tyvon is helpfully pointing out that.
Taking notes for her.
Yeah. Market research. We have been conducting surveys the past couple of years, and Tyvon has been in charge of developing those surveys, and we had one in 2015 and one in 2017. Mm-hmm. What else have we done on market research?
So that helps us to understand our audience as self-reported. We also use Google Analytics to help us understand where folks are reading from, and the sort of general demographic of that. And we also use the sort of the native analytics and our social for that audience information as well. But we also, we have a business trade magazine, Vermont Business Magazine, has an annual business guide, and we were just talking the other day about going through that. They do list businesses by revenue, by sector, and so there's ways to just glean some general information that would help to identify potential new underwriters or corporate sponsors who might be interested in certain things. We also, our salespeople and Anne and myself, we go out to the community at networking sessions, and get invited a lot to do talks. And so we come back to the office with a lot of information already gathered that we can share amongst ourselves. Teresa's always asking me to check my LinkedIn connections and try to make connections that way to do a little market research before we go out to have a meeting. And also we're covering business as a beat, so we have a really good idea as to some of the trends that are happening in our state, and so that that also informs us as well.
Great. I'm going to pause here just for a minute to ask anybody to open it up to folks who are dialed in on the webinar. And again, you can ask questions either of 2 ways. You can hit chat at the bottom of your screen, and that'll pull up a sidebar to put in questions via chat. Or you can just unmute your speaker and ask by voice. So there's a couple ways to send something in. And I'm hearing someone unmuted. Does someone have a question?
Yeah, I see Amy Martin has unmuted. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, Amy?
Thanks. This is a really awesome opportunity to learn from you. I really appreciate it. One of my questions, Drew, came from the case study. I was really interested in what you were talking about with board development. And can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. In particular, I was really interested in the how much you use your board as fundraisers. And I have an advisory board for my own nonprofit venture, and they are strictly advisory at this point. And we're not our own standalone nonprofit yet. We have a fiscal sponsorship, but we're moving toward that. And I feel like as we move toward that, I need to figure out how to make my board into more of a fundraising entity like you have, and how do you make that transition? Because it feels like these are awesome people who are bought into the project, who are really helpful. And there's a little tension there of like, okay, now how do I make you into a powerhouse fundraiser? I'd love your insights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been an ongoing effort. The Vermont Journalism Trust, which is the 501c3 we operate under, we had a merger between the VTDigger advisory board early on, which was mostly journalists and concerned people in the community. And the Vermont Journalism Trust Board included a couple of people who had connections with the Vermont Community Foundation, and then there were a couple of business people on the board. And we've tried to keep a mix of people with money on the board and former journalists. And other people who just really get journalism and really care about journalism. And the first criteria for any board member is really about figuring out if that person gets what you're doing and gets the whole journalism mission. Because if people don't understand, if you get people on your board who run foundations or who are major CEOs or whatever, which we've done, that can, they may not get the whole, we bite the hand that feeds this thing, you know. So you want to make sure that you have people on your board who absolutely understand that you're not advocating for anything, that you're going to write stories based on news value only. And if you get people like that on your board who also have connections in the community and have business connections, you can basically form a development subcommittee and talk to those people about who they know and who might be willing to support your effort. And then we've also been able to develop capacity on our board. Last year, we raised more than $80,000 from board members. And some of that was through family foundations they run. Some of it was from private donations that they had given. But it is important to have board members with capacity and with connections. It's give or get, right? That's the rule with boards. And it can take a while, you know. It can take a few years to get people on your board who are just perfect. But if you have a good board chair who can help lead the effort, that's good. I have board members who go on donor calls with me. I have board members who help me get into the door with underwriting contacts. And I do a lot of, I meet with a lot of people. I meet with people, anyone who's interested in Digger, I meet with them. You know, anyone who is in the business community well, of course, I meet with sources all the time too, you know, so it's a range of people, but we try to stay really close to the ground. We try to really listen to what people want and what they're telling us. With donors, it's tricky because you can't do what they want. So the first thing you have to say is, you know, I'm happy to listen to you, but we may or may not take your story idea. You know, it depends. And I might even talk them through if something doesn't have news value. I might tell them, well, you know, I'm sorry, but that's an interesting idea, but we can't really pursue that. I just try to be really honest and upfront with people like that. And with the board, I think I'm always talking about the journalism with the board because it's dynamic. You know, the work we do changes all the time. And people are truly interested, especially now, in how journalism works. And they want to be a part of it in terms of just being a booster. I mean, I really use my board in terms of boosterism. They are the first line of defense at cocktail parties. You know, they're chatting us up. And, you know, over the past 5 or 6 years, one of our big underwriters said, you know, 10 years ago, everybody was talking about the story that they heard on Vermont Public Radio. She said, now all people talk about, all they say is, did you see that on Digger? You know, so you know, you want to be part of the cocktail party circuit. You want to be read and talked about, and you do that by, you know, of course, doing the great journalism you guys are doing, but also by making those contacts and helping people understand that. You know, what your larger mission is.
Great. I'm going to jump in here for Amy and the others with governance issues. We do have a webinar coming up July 18th with Terrell Thompson, who works in this area a lot, specifically on care and feeding and building boards that are both program and fundraising boards. So there will be more on that. I'm going to just jump. We'll come back on the audio, but we had several people type in questions. One on what are the most effective packages you currently offer with underwriting? What do you find works?
Sure. Well, we have a new and improved media kit. So we used to have a media kit that would have been appropriate for probably someone who is, I don't know, selling oranges for a high school band project. It was basically a white folder with a bumper sticker on it. So now we have this fancy media kit that, you know, has lots of bells and whistles and pages in it explaining our underwriting program, and it's been beautifully graphically designed and all that stuff. And that took us a while to put together, but it's something we can leave behind that helps people understand what our packages are. And part of the rationale for redoing our media kit was to introduce new products. So in addition to having display advertising on the site, we also offer we offer ads in email, and that's extremely popular. We also offer what we call a baseboard ad, which basically is something you have to click out of, but it runs across the bottom of your site. You know, it's just right across the bottom. You can still see the content above it, and you can click out of it if it's annoying. But that has had a really tremendous click-through. And then we also have a paid post product. We call it Sponsor Spotlight, and it's clearly marked on the front page. It's part of our front page lineup. So we have a front page that looks sort of like a newspaper, and then in the lower left-hand corner, you can see it there. It says Sponsor Spotlight, and it's a gray box, and there's a photo, and there's a headline, and it's content from UVM Health Network or from, who else do we have in there, Pavan?
Vermont NEA.
The Vermont NEA is using it. It's basically a vehicle for people to put more messaging out there beyond a display ad. And these two products, the baseboard ad and the Sponsor Spotlight, have been hugely popular, hugely successful. And we've been using this as a pilot for the past year, and we're using this as a way to sell more underwriting packages for display. The email also is incredibly popular, and we charge basically $500 for 30,000 impressions. We use DoubleClick for publishers, so we can measure all that. We can't absolutely swear in writing that we'll provide that to underwriters because of our 501c3 status. You know, this is we can't make that kind of promise, but we basically deliver that. And we have a new dashboard on the back end that we're developing that will basically float in all the data from the display ads, from email, from the Sponsor Spotlight and the baseboard ads, so that when we need to report to ad agencies on how well a campaign has gone, we can do that. We can say, you know, this message as a paid post was fantastic. your baseboard ad didn't do so well, maybe we need to improve the graphics. You know, we're trying to work with businesses we want them to be successful. We want them to reach readers. And so, you know, we do everything we can to make that possible. We also are experimenting with podcast and video advertising. And then we're going to have this obituary section. And on that section, we're going to start experimenting with smaller ads at a lower cost for small, medium-sized businesses. And I should have mentioned that, it's the $500 a week for 30,000 impressions. If people buy in at that level for a certain period of time, for a quarter, then they get some of these bells and whistles with the baseboard ad and the paid post at no cost. But we're going to start limiting that for some of our bigger underwriters because they're using a lot and they've gotten a great bang for the buck. And we're going to go back to them and say, great, we're so glad you like this. Now it's been so successful. We have all these other underwriters that are interested, and I'm sorry, but we're going to have to offer this as a premium product for you. We're going to offer it to you for free for two days a month. If you want more than that, it costs X. We haven't figured that out yet, but yeah, that's where we're working towards.
It's really helpful to be able to messages as like they're the early adopters of this new feature that we're going to do and help us make it a success. And we'll try our best to make sure that it works for you. And so it's been really great to be able to have a business say, this is what I'd like to do. And we're like, those are fun, creative challenges for us. We can't always do it on their timetable, but at least they're communicating with us what they need, and they see it as valuable and a place where they want that solution to exist.
Yeah, we really work a lot. We want to make sure they're happy. It's customer service.
Hey, Anne, Eric on the call asked a question that's kind of related to this, and it was partly managing yourself. How do you balance reporting work and business development work? So if you are working on a story and you want to quote somebody who you might have previously pitched on a underwriting sponsorship or gone to for funding help, how do you manage those conversations in dividing the work?
Well, I don't, that's one of the reasons why I hired an underwriting salesperson who could run interference on that stuff. Because inevitably we're going to write stories that businesses aren't going to like. So you don't want to be in a position where you're making that call. Although, now that I have reporters, for example, who are doing the work on the ground, and I have editors who are also working on projects with reporters, I sometimes will make calls to underwriters or to donors, and they'll complain to me about a story, and I'll say, well, that's okay. I understand how you feel, but what the service we provide is really important to the community, and I hope they'll think about supporting us. It's really tricky that. I mean, we recently had this big series on the basing of a fighter jet, the F-35 in Burlington, and we had a donor who's been really mad at us for a while because we've investigated some pretty major issues with that basing, and including the fact that they may be carrying nuclear warheads, and people are up in arms about the whole thing. The planes haven't been tested properly, there's safety questions, et cetera. Not to mention the noise, which is going to basically hurt the local economy because people aren't going to want to live in areas that have the excessive noise. Well, one of our donors is a big backer of this basing, and he's been writing hate letters to me for a while, and I've just been very polite responding and saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, but we have to cover this, and we write for readers. We don't write for donors. We write for readers. We don't write for underwriters. It's something I say all the time. And I think people are beginning to understand that. And if they don't, they leave. That's okay. It's all right if people don't hang on forever. Of course, you want to be able to keep people going, but the mature underwriters, the mature donors understand that our role is really important, whether it hurts them personally or not. And we've had people come back. I mean, we've had people who stopped funding us for a while who've come back. Underwriters who, you know, we did a big expose of a big psychiatric hospital in southern Vermont back in 2013. Prior to that, they had advertised with us a little bit, and it looks like they're going to come back this year as an underwriter. And I feel really good about that, mostly because the work we did was hugely important. There were a number of suicides at the psychiatric hospital. We reported them all. They got into trouble with CMS. We reported that. They almost lost their Medicaid funding. It was terrible for them, right? But guess what? Since we did that big expose, they have not had a single suicide in 4 years at that facility. So I feel like, you know, what we did in shining a light on what was going on there really helped them and helped the community in a serious way. And it's not, we're just doing our jobs. It's not antagonistic. We're really trying to help others become better. Early on, how'd I handle that? Well, I hired an underwriting person. Eric wanted to know how I handled the split. Really got to have an underwriting person who's on the front lines talking to businesses. That's the best way to handle it. And you got to take that risk. If you've got a daily, if you have a critical mass of readers, you have a daily production schedule, you're going to be able to get the underwriters to back you. So you got to take a risk and hire someone to do that work for you. Just simple as that. Yeah.
Let's pause there. We have other questions on chat. Did anybody have anything they wanted to ask directly? Okay.
It's a shy journalist. I'm happy to answer the questions that are up. Okay, let's see.
There was a follow-up on that, and how did you think of that in the first couple of years when you were a one-person shop?
Right.
Did you even have underwriting at that point? Yeah.
I had one underwriter. I went to Cabot Creamery and talked to a woman that I didn't know it was a cold call, but I knew that she liked to support wacky ideas like this. I was told that she might be interested, and so she gave us about $8,000 over 2 years in a row. And so we had very few underwriters in the early days. I think she might have been the only one in the beginning, actually. The rest was donations. So, I mean, you could go to people who you know you're not going to report on. That would be one strategy, just to make a little bit of money. And then, you've got people in your business community you know like what you do. Just go. I always say go to the people who already get what you do, who already like what you do. Those are the people you want to reach out to. You don't want to have to persuade people that what you're doing is valuable. They should know that already. So go to the people who know that already.
Yeah, so part of our market research is also looking at VPR and 7 days and folks that are advertising on like a competition. And so those people are already advertising. They already have an advertising budget. And so all you need to do is make sure that you're an option in that budget. I mean, that's not all you need to do, but that's one strategy. Just tagging on that, Bill's asked a couple of times about network advertising. We don't take any network advertising. Right now, we haven't talked about doing that. All of our ads on our site that you see are direct sales.
That's right. We decided not to use network advertising because we thought it would undermine our larger sales effort. Network advertising typically is at a much, much lower rate, and we didn't want to, I don't like giving anything away unless it benefits us in the long run, and I just feel like network advertising is a bummer. I understand there are people who have new concepts on that, and I'd be open to considering something that isn't teeth whitening, but I don't have any interest in the Google stuff, we've really not gone down that path. We have a question about maintaining donor relationships and converting one-time donors to monthly donors. And the donor relationships really are about meeting people a couple of times a year and just keeping them up to date on what we're working on and what our progress is. And the way it's worked up until the past year, so we basically, people gave us money over the transom. They'd give us $500 or they'd give us $1,000 or $5,000. And that's again, our sort of built-in audience of potential larger donors. So we go through our donor list and we identify people who've given at that level, and we meet with them just to let them know what we're up to and to get their feedback. And that's how we've maintained our donor relationships. And so every year, you know, happily, it's more and more people we meet with, and sometimes our board members meet with individual donors who are, you know, want to give us feedback. So that's how we do that. And then how do you convert one-time donors to monthly donors? I'm going to let Yvonne speak to that because she's been on the front line.
Yeah, so we had been set up for monthly donations through PayPal, and they have a mechanism to do that. And so that required fairly little maintenance except for when folks' credit cards expire. And so we put it out there we had been putting it out there kind of like, here are the ways to give and sign up to be a monthly donor, and that's an option on our donate page. This past year, we've put much more greater emphasis on sustaining monthly donors, and we use sustaining monthly donors as the term, and I think the conversion is not super hard in terms of getting people to understand the concept, because VPR does this all the time. They're always doing fund drives on the radio and asking for folks to sign up at the monthly give option. And so I feel like the landscape is, they're ready for it, and people are used to doing that. We just have to message it out and tell people that we have this option. And so we ran ads on our site specifically to encourage monthly donations. And this year we set up a monthly donation through an automatic withdrawal through a bank account. And so we are trying to actually convert our current monthly donors to use that option because it's more cost effective for us. And it means, you know, unless you close your bank account and don't have any money in there, it's always going to work. And so there's the idea is there's less donor maintenance in that part.
Talk about the direct mail campaign to increase the monthly donation.
Yeah, so we did a direct mail segment this spring as part of our fundraising to folks that were giving to us monthly, and we split that out into 3 mini segments depending on the level of give that they were currently doing per month. And so for the lower levels, we were asking them to increase their monthly donation. For right now, our average monthly give across the spectrum is $15 a month. And so we were targeting folks that had not yet reached that threshold and asked them to increase their monthly, which worked for a lot of folks. And yes, $15 a month. And some people who were even more than, who we didn't even ask, ended up increasing too, because we ran ads specifically asking people to increase their monthly donation. And that was just ads on our website, just like regular ads. And then another segment was for folks that are kind of in the middle. We asked them to convert to ACH, direct withdrawal from the bank account. And we included a form for them to do it and told them to give us a call. We also have a web form that they can do on the donate page. And then for the higher level donors, we have folks that give us between $25 and $175 a month. We ask them to make a special one-time gift, so that because it seems a little weird to us maybe to ask them to increase when they're giving that much already. Right now we have over 500 monthly donors every month, and we hope to increase that significantly by putting much more emphasis on this at every fundraising drive.
Yeah, it's really important because it's base budget money. And we make, what, about $100 per monthly donor?
$100 per
I mean, I'm sorry, well, $100 per year per monthly donor. So
well, at $15 a month, it's about like a little under $150.
Right. So anyway, I was trying to do the math, and this is why I don't do the accounting. I wanted to, give you a sense of like the total amount per year that we count on for monthly donations. What is it, about 75,000 or something like that?
Yeah, it's increasing. We're just, I think, about 5,500 per month right now. There's a little attrition, obviously, but we have the persistent message. So every month we get a new sign up, so even when we're not fundraising. So
we want to grow that. I mean, we'd like to be at 1,000, eventually 2,000 monthly donors. I think VPR has what, 18,000?
Oh gosh,
monthly donors, something insane like that.
Yeah,
so
it's on their annual report.
Yeah, but the monthly donations are great because it really is something we just plug right into our budget. We don't have to worry about raising that money at the end of the year. I mean, people fall off. They get mad at us and they say, "I'm not giving you anymore," whatever. But mostly the attrition rate and then it evens out to a plus, not a minus. So.
Hey, Anne and Pavan, I'm going to go back up the list a little bit. There was an earlier question asking you to talk a little bit more about email. What size email list do you have? What are your goals around growing your email list? How do you grow them? And do you have more than one email that goes out regularly? So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. Our Daily Digger email list is about 19,000 a day. We offer the daily email Monday through Saturday. We schedule it. You can schedule it the night before. It's based on an RSS feed from our WordPress site that feeds into MailChimp, and we have an app on the back end that we just send out every morning, and it enables us to put a subject line in it. So that goes out Monday through Saturday, and then on Sundays we have a weekly wrap-up that goes out, which is basically all of our stories, and I spend a lot of time reorganizing that into six. I put all the top news at the top, and then I have news by category underneath. Usually politics is underneath the top news, and then I have healthcare and I have education, and I have criminal justice stuff and community reporting because we have reporters in Burlington, Southern Vermont. And then I send that. So some people sign up for the weekly, some people sign up for the daily, some people sign up for both. And then in addition to that, we're starting the segmented email feed that goes out twice a week. We have one email just for politics and another email just for healthcare, and it's all of the political news for the week, all the healthcare news for the week. And we are going to be building that out to include education and several other topics, probably business and economy. And then we're also talking about producing an Axios-style product that would go out in the evenings. We're going to call it our Bulldog edition. But I have to go out on a limb and hire an editor to handle just this one product. So I haven't done it yet. Yeah. And I'm still trying to think it through in terms of how much copy we produce and what we would do. But basically, I want to have a 300-word synopsis of the news from that day that people can read. And I do think Axios is brilliant in that they've really figured out how to tell people what's important. And I think that our readership would really respond to that. And I think our underwriters would respond to it. And we're thinking about making this a product that would only be available to people who donate something, at least $5. Because we want to get people in and thinking about donating. And so I'm thinking about making this kind of at least $5. We'd like a lot more than that. It's worth a lot more than that. But please just buy in. And you only get the Axios email if you do that. And that way, hoping that we'll be able to build our donor base over time.
So that would stay a freemium. You'd still have your just RSS raw daily feed.
Right.
Doesn't have
Yeah.
any editorial production. That's just on autopilot, right? So
Yes.
that just would go
So
out free, and then these others are for donors.
So the content would still be available to anyone who wants it at no cost. But this premium product, which actually requires a lot of effort on our part, you know, would be something that they would have to pay for. And then we want to recycle this for our, we want to use this for AI. We want to be able to read this basically, and we want to create a mini podcast that can be used for Echo and Alexa. And then we also want to be able to use it as a daily podcast that's on our site for the morning. So I believe in leveraging resources as much as possible, reusing stuff as much as possible. So that's how we would use that. And then we would also use it potentially for a radio project, because we're exploring an AP-style radio brief distribution model to radio stations around the state. And this could be the copy we use for that.
Yeah, so the segmented emails that we have right now, politics is on Mondays and healthcare is on Tuesdays. The way we were able to segment that was we did an embed in story for the stories that are tagged for those topics. So our politics stories has a new a sign up embedded in the story. And so within the first month, we had about 400 signups. We didn't do any promotion on that. We just did it, and it just went out to everybody who signed up for it. And same thing with healthcare. We've redone the sign up list. So if you go to your change subscriptions or sign up, you can actually. We have all of the choices. Not all of them are active right now, but so for someone who's signed up for education, we don't have an education email out right now. But when we start it, they will start getting it. So we're actually developing those lists ahead of developing the product right now. So that's one strategy. And in terms of collecting emails, we have the embed on our right rail on every page. We also are using SumoMe as a end of story, pop up and say, sign up for the Daily Digger. We get a lot of subscriptions that way. Mike Doherty, who's running our Facebook page, it has the sign up embed in our instant articles. And so once a week, he downloads all those subscriptions and puts them into MailChimp. So that's one way. We have our donate page is integrated with our donor CRM to automatically capture online donations and automatically capture the information there. So you have to, you're prompted to put your email address in so that you get a receipt of your donation. And that gets captured in our CRM, and it automatically writes to MailChimp, which is the email server that we use. And so they're automatically added to our list that way. And then we also collect emails all the time at the events that we go to. Our board great advocates, and they send us emails of people that they've talked to who said, yeah, sign me up. And so they'll send it to the staff, and we'll sign up those folks too. So there's lots of digital and analog ways of getting these emails and building the list. And it's so crucial because we use email pretty heavily when we're fundraising, because you don't have to pay to be on the list. And so these folks are getting our product for free all the time. And just a few times a year, we ask them via email to support the thing that they're reading. And that's also been helpful because we can, with each fundraising email that we send out, we can select off the people that just gave to us yesterday, for example. So we're not re-asking those people that are already given. So it's a really good way to really target the folks that we know have not donated to us before.
That's great. There was a question early on about, are there aspects of your market, the size of Vermont, the small size of it, that make things work there that might not work elsewhere? And I had a related question to that. I was just wondering about, as you were talking about these emails, how many of your readers actually live in Vermont full time versus how much of your audience might have a second home there, or they just love Vermont and
well, that's a great question. I'm not sure how that breaks up for email, but with our readership on the whole, we have about 240,000 readers a month, or 300,000 users a month, depending on how you want to look at it. And about half that number are from out of state. And that's part of why we think we can grow our readership. You know, I told you at the beginning that we want to double our readership. And because we're a daily, I think I've been looking at the wrong metric. I've been looking at the monthly number, which always seems like, wow, 240,000, that seems like an awful lot. But if you think about newspaper subscriptions back in the day, and you think about readership in Burlington or in Central Vermont and the newspapers that serve those communities, we're talking about newspaper subscriptions total just for those two dailies of about 70,000 a day, 80,000, between 70 and 80,000 a day. So I think that we should be looking at the daily metric. 2 years ago, our daily readership was about 8,000. Today, our daily readership is 13,000. In order to get to our goal, which is 20, which I think is totally realistic given, you know, the readership that existed not that long ago, like 8 or 10 years ago, we need to have an email subscription list of 30,000 because we know that our open rate is around 35%. So anyway, to get back to your point about are there things unique to Vermont that make this possible? Well, it's true that I think people here are very, they're very interested in their communities. But I think that, you know, we went through a period of about 10 years where there was less and less coverage of what was really happening in the state and what was really happening in Montpelier, our state capital. And so when we came on the scene, I think we immediately met a need. People were like, they wanted more news. And I just can't believe that that isn't true in a lot of places. And the fact of the matter is that because there were no watchdog operations here in Vermont for such a long time, you had the fraud at JP. That's what that's what enabled that to happen. If journalists had been doing their job, and we had enough journalists in the state of Vermont, that whole thing would have been exposed long before I got to it. You know, we've had a number of embezzlements in the state that have happened because there aren't enough reporters. So I think that, you know, yes, we have a small population, and we have our biggest city, Burlington, and the environs is about 100,000. So, you know, our total population is 626,000 people. That said, you know, we used to have some really big media organizations that truly covered the state, and the law of diminishing returns has kicked in. They've cut back on staff dramatically. 75% of the journalists at the Free Press and the Rutland Herald and the Times are gone. So I think people want news, and I can't believe that it's just that we're a unicorn here in Vermont. I think that part of our success really has to do with the fact that we respond to reader requests. Readers give us tips. Readers interact with us by email. They call the office. They want help. They want us to shine a light on things. We can't always get to everything. Sometimes they bring up stuff that, you know, is pretty interesting and fun. And we're going to have a wall of rejected tips at some point in the office because it's so cute. People come to us with everything. But, you know, often the tips are viable, and people know they can come to us for help. And that, I think, is part of the reason why we've been able to develop this readership and develop the support we have, because people know that we have a job to do. It's an important job, and we're doing it. We're filling a vacuum. You know, we're filling a vacuum. And I think that could be true in any state, any community. It's finding the stories that really help readers connect to you. And instead of having, you know, I think often as journalists we have a top-down approach. We think we know what needs to be covered. Most of the time that's true. But I also think it's really important to think about, well, to listen to people. One of the reasons why I like going to underwriting calls is because people tell me the most amazing things. And it turns in, my God, I got a story. Like, business people like to rat on each other. So I get all kinds of great business stories, and by doing underwriting calls on occasion, so it's really about listening to real people out there and hearing, the scuttlebutt, like what's the gossip? I love gossip. So, I pay attention to that because that's the buzz. That's what people are talking about. That's what they want to know about. So on some level, we're just journalists. We're just one step above the gossip mongers, right? And and there's a place for that because we need to be listening. We need to be hearing what's going on in our communities and writing the stories no one is exploring. So
speaking of tips, we get tips in all different ways, and I get tips over Facebook Messenger from my friends too, and I just pass them on. So it's in terms of that, just having an overall ethic across the organization, and that we are listening to you.
Yeah, our underwriting salesperson will come back and say, "Did you hear about blah blah blah?" I'm like, "No, I had no idea. That's a great story." And then we get on it. I'm sorry.
Do you, when you report on something that came in through a tip, do you say we got this through a reader request or tip?
No, we don't.
Want to say how you get tips?
We get tips through an anonymous form on our website. That's actually quite popular. It's at the bottom of every story. We also have a report and error form. And people feel really comfortable filling out a form. They may not call. They might not email one of the reporters or me, but they definitely like the form because it feels anonymous, even though, technically speaking, it's not secure. Like, we could get their IP address if we wanted to. We don't take those kinds of tips there. People actually send us letters because we encourage them to do that without addresses on the envelope. So last week we found out that the Vermont Law School was going through a series of potential layoffs and restructuring, and that tip came through the mail. Someone typed it up and said, "Gosh, I'd love to be able to tell you who I am, but I really don't feel comfortable doing that. Here's the tip." And then they sent it through U.S. Post. We get this kind of tip a lot, in addition to the form tips and email and phone calls. But we don't identify where we got our tips. I don't know how. I guess people just know we do this. I think the word is out that this is the kind of stuff we do. And when we broke the JP story, we got a lot of crap, from people for years, including state officials. Governor Shumlin called us National Enquirer, and this was pre-Trump, okay? And so people knew, and then we would report on all the pushback that we got from state officials. And then when the SEC brought charges against the developers, I think people were so amazed that this little upstart organization got it right. I mean, it totally flew in the face of conventional wisdom. We just, went for it. And I think that really changed people's thinking about Digger. It woke people up about who we are and what we do. And that's part of the reason why they're like, "Oh, Digger investigates stuff. Let's send a tip to them." So I think that's kind of the, that's the vibe we're giving people, and they've responded to that. Yeah.
There's a really interesting question from David about how you target. Do you strive to be the main news source now or a supplement? How do you handle breaking news versus enterprise? And I'm really curious about that, if you can talk about it now, but also has that evolved? Is now you're a pretty mainstream news source, but when you were little, did you focus more on niches where you could have more impact?
That's a great question. When we started, it was extremely difficult because I'm a really ambitious person, and I want to cover everything. And I always wanted to cover everything. So what did I do? I went to the State House and I tried to cover everything and nearly killed myself. But actually covering the State House is a great way to start because it gives you a window on so many different worlds. There are people, representatives from all over the state who are have concerns about their local communities. There are people there who are have more global interests with business, and of course there's a state budget, and there are environmental issues that come up. So by virtue of covering the State House in the beginning, that gave me a real window on the scope of coverage and gave me this idea that we should really focus on beat reporting. Now, prior to this, I should preface this by saying that when we started in September 2009, my idea was to start an investigative news website. And I had some freelancers who were interested in this idea, and we published once a week. We published 2 or 3 stories once a week. And I just thought, my God, we're never going to get enough eyeballs to fulfill the business plan. The business plan was to sell underwriting. The business plan was to have membership. You can't do that if people are coming to your site once a week. I thought, I'll be dead before I get enough readers to raise money. So I thought, well, maybe we should become a daily. And this was before we had any reporters or any business staff. So I started going into the State House and writing 1 to 2 stories a day. And just doing that kind of basic daily reporting on things that sometimes other reporters were on the same thing. So I'd go to the governor's press conference and I'd cover that. Or I'd be in committee covering some piece of legislation or some testimony on a major issue that no one was covering. And, I think that for us, it's always been a struggle doing the investigative work on top of the daily. And we've been talking about that just this week, like how do we manage that? How do we give daily reporters enough time to develop investigative projects? And we now have an investigative editor, which really helps drive that train. But it's hard. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. But the thing is, if you're doing the daily reporting, you get so many, you're on the ground. You know the scuttlebutt. You know what's happening. And there, you see the opportunities for investigative reporting. And so when we've had a situation in which a reporter has had an opportunity to do something bigger, we try to give reporters more time. And we also ask them to string things along. I mean, maybe you're starting with a public records request, and it's going to take you 10 days or 2 weeks to get that request fulfilled. Well, that gives you time to do other stuff. Then the request comes back, and then there's a window of time which maybe you want to hammer on the reporting for 3 or 4 days. And then maybe you're stuck. Maybe you don't have, a full story yet, and we need to mull it over or recalibrate or get more records. Then that's an opportunity to more do daily reporting. And then you go back to it and spend a week writing it. So that's kind of how we've done it in the past. If you talk to reporters from most daily newspapers who do investigative stuff, they string it along. They do the easy daily stories. I mean, if you're a pro, if you know what you're doing, you can turn around a daily in 3 or 4 hours. And that's part of the reason why we have the beat reporting approach too, because a lot of the work we do is follow-up, because it's accountability reporting, right? So we'll write about the same issue. There are more than 200 stories about Jay Peak, for example. We've written at least 100 stories about the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee, our nuclear power plant in southern Vermont. Why? Because it's always changing. And you have to hold people accountable on major issues like that so that people know the latest, greatest on what's happening. If you only write a story once a year on Vermont Yankee, how in the world are you going to hold the Entergy Corporation to account when they're selling this thing to North Star and they're going to use the decommissioning fund up, and there may not be enough money to actually deal with the nuclear waste? Like, you have to be on that, right? And the other thing is, if you're on it, people trust you with the story, and they'll give you incredible tips. And Vermont Yankee is a great example because we eat for maybe 7 or 8 months, and an anonymous tipster came into my office. He had some photos on his computer. He was nervous as all get out. It was photos of kiddie pools in the basement of the nuclear reactor that they were using to collect water that was coming into the building. And, the contaminated water. This is, irradiated water. And at any rate, this was a great story. This was my favorite stories of all time because I got to run pictures of a kiddie pool with, you know, hazard signs on it and stuff. It was really fun. This story went viral. It was great. But the only reason that someone trusted us with that tip was because we were the only news outlet covering Vermont Yankees. Like, we're it. You know, so that's how you get the good tips, too.
But it also affected change, too.
It affected change. They changed the policy. They started removing the water, putting it in these big balloons, and then shipping it off-site for proper disposal. Yeah.
That's great. So Anne, Amy asked the question, and obviously your reporter is coming right through the screen. How much of your time is spent running the organization, and how much time is being a reporter? And you talked about a couple of ways those overlap too.
Yeah, well, I feel really lucky to have such a great staff and to have such a terrific, you know, set of editors on staff. So I'm at a point, you know, in the beginning I did everything, right? I mean, and it was totally crazy. And I, you know, still even up until a couple of years ago was really doing way too much on all fronts. Although, like most of you, of course, I'd rather be reporting. So that's always a hard thing for me to give up. But I would say 10% of my time now is spent editing. I only look at the most controversial stories or investigative stories, and then I help the desk. I fill in as needed, but mostly they handle that. I only have a few areas of reporting that I'm involved in, one of which is EB5, mostly because I still have a lot of sources in that area. I sometimes will do political reporting. I mostly fill in, or I work on extremely sensitive stories. And sometimes the way we'll do it is a whistleblower will come in, or a person, I'll listen to them with another editor, and then we'll figure out how we're going to report on it, and it gets passed off to a reporter. But often it's really important for me to know what's going on with those really big stories, because we need to get our attorney involved in vetting the pieces. We need to make sure we're ready for all kinds of pushback. So I'm involved that way. So really, I would say probably at least 50% of my time, maybe 60. Okay, so part of it's management, right? I would say probably 30% of my time is management, and the other, have I gone over yet? Other 30% of my time is fundraising, and maybe 20% is reporting. So I usually try to I like to do a story a week, 2 stories a week, something like that. And then I'm mostly doing large donor work and working with the board, and then making sure that people are happy on staff, that we're getting the work done. So that's what I spend most of my time on, but I don't know if that helps or not. It's still a crazy schedule, you know, I'm still working too many hours, but it's way better than it used to be. Yeah. So how are we doing?
We've got about 7 minutes, so time for one more question or two. I'm just scrolling up to make sure, and if we've overlooked anybody, you should pipe up. Oh, there was a question earlier going back to underwriting, and this is kind of a life cycle question too. The question was, what's critical mass in terms of your audience size for underwriting? I would also ask, how do you sell underwriting that isn't linked to your number of impressions or a specific metric, but just on your influence and kind of the brand association? So one is, what's the critical mass of actual audience? And then the second is, what do you do anything, and what is so around that?
Well, I'm going to try to answer both questions at once. I think when we started Digger, it really was a mission ask. It was a request from businesses based on the value to the community and on branding. And so that really was the case until about 5 years, 5 or 6 years ago, because we just didn't have the readership to satisfy ad agencies. When did we first get Paula Basluke involved? I mean, ad agencies.
2014 is when I came on.
Yeah. Ad agencies really didn't want to have anything to do with us until 2013, 2014. And when you get ad agencies involved, they want to know the numbers. And that's why we started selling based on impressions. Prior to that, we sold based on a time-space continuum. So we sold, and the price hasn't changed, basically. Back then, it was $500 a week. And basically what you got was branding. And you got a presence in the email, and that was it. And, some of those early underwriters are still with us. We made the leap in 2014 to double-click for publishers, and we were able to begin to report on how many impressions we were able to give people. And we started selling the product based on impressions, because double-click for publishers rotates the ads based on the number of impressions sold, as opposed to for a period of time. So we transitioned to that once we had, I'd have to go back to Tim's fabulous report to see how many readers we had in 2014. And maybe Clivon will look that up for me. But yeah, you can do it based on branding in the beginning. No question about it. And then the critical mass number, I'm not sure, probably 100,000 readers. What do you think? Where's 2014?
Users.
So monthly users, monthly users, we were at 125,000 in 2014. And our page, I don't know what our page views were that year, but we had about 100,000 readers a month. So that was critical mass for us. I don't know what critical mass would be for folks out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will add that there are quite a few members that do pretty well with underwriting without necessarily having a large audience. It's some of them, they have an influencer audience. So every official and every corporate head in the state reads their stuff, and they're selling against that niche influencer audience. Others are hitting specific communities, either ethnic groups or people with interest in a certain topic, and so we're selling against that versus just numbers. We hear both of those versions quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. That also worked. That also worked for us in the beginning. That was the pitch we made. We have the most powerful people in the state reading Digger every day.
Mm-hmm.
You should be, if you want their attention, this is the place to get it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, that's still happening now. We have ads
Mm-hmm.
right now from the Vermont Ethics Commission. And they wouldn't be underwriting with us if they didn't know their public servants needed this information that they're providing, right? So and to address questions about metrics, we use metrics to report out our underwriting with DFP, and Mike keeps the weekly analytics report that he sends out to us with page views, what's gone viral, our followers, if they've increased or not. And so we use that just for as sort of internal compass so that we know if we're doing right. And we use Google Analytics. We have a screen up, in the hall that shows people our real-time audience. So all of our reporters can look and see how well their story did, the hour it posted. So we use metrics a lot of different ways, and some underwriters care and some don't care. So it's really it helps us to talk to the ones that need it, and also to help us to figure out what our next step is in our business plan.
Great. We had one question I'm not sure we'll get to, which is advertising and taxed income versus contributions. And so maybe to Ken, who asked that, that's probably something we should do with a nonprofit tax law person, and maybe we'll come back to that on a separate webinar, okay? And that also covers it under some legal provisions, so you can have a private conversation about that. I'll close with the one that Bob posted to everyone. He asked, what advice would you give to a site looking to attract foundation support? I might run that to any support too. you've talked a lot about positioning, and so kind of a final word for the people on this call of how you position yourself. What's the story that you tell foundations or the public about your importance that is convincing people to support news?
Well, that's a great question. I think that I think it's important to tell people that you know, we're really replacing mainstream media in Vermont, and what we're doing is an experiment, and it needs to succeed in order for our little democracy here in corner of the United States can survive in a way that enables people here to engage in the democratic process. And I tell them that, you know, we're developing a sustainable business model, and we'd like them to become part of it. And that model is so important because it's what supports the journalists, and it's the commercial business model that's broken, and we need to find a way as entrepreneurs to go forward and support it. So I don't know. I mean, we've been making pitches lately about, you know, how vital we are to our local democracy, and that's something we've talked about before, but I think it's even more important now than it was a few years ago, mostly because there's so few reporters left in the state. And people get that. They understand that they wouldn't, without us, they wouldn't get the news. And we're the only ones that are really doing the kind of daily journalism that existed in the old days. And people appreciate that. And it's not just older people, it's more and more younger people too. And we're trying to use the latest technology to bring news to everyone. You know, our goal is to reach people on country music stations and on soft rock stations through our radio project. Our goal is to reach young people through video and podcasts. Our goal is to reach as many people as we possibly can who care about Vermont. And we don't want to just pitch our news to the overly informed over at VPR, much as we like VPR. That's an important audience too. But, you know, really, I think that the reason we have so much partisanship in this country and we're so divided is because people don't have a local connection to news. We want to be that local connection so that they understand that they can influence their lawmakers. They can have an impact on what's happening in DC through their own congressional delegation. We're the avenue for that. We're the vehicle. And also we shine a light on things that they care about. When things go wrong, we're there to help them. So I don't know. Now I'm getting off pitch.
No, I think you're right on pitch. So we're going to wrap up. That seems like a great place to end. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
For what you
Thank
do
you.
and talking about it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.